Hey friends, this is Michael again, costume director for the Dallas Theater Center, and this is video 3 of 4 in our mask making series. In video number 3, we're going to talk about basic sewing concepts that you'll use to put your mask together. In this video, we'll talk about some basic parts of the sewing machine, how to use the sewing machine, perhaps with a straight stitch or a zigzag. We'll talk about hand sewing techniques and some specific stitches that you can use. Remember, like I mentioned in video 1, you don't need a sewing machine for this project. You can hand sew it all together, though be aware that it will take you longer to complete. This is one of my sewing machines. It's a Kenmore Model 385, and I'll be using this for our video demonstration today. This machine was purchased in the year 2000. It is 20 years old this year. Don't be afraid of older machines. Sometimes older machines are less complicated and they last longer. Another example of one of my machines is an old Singer Model 301A from 1951 and is by far one of the best sewing machines I've ever used. Okay, let's take a quick second to go over some of the operating features of a sewing machine. Now, if your sewing machine looks radically different than mine, don't despair. Most sewing machines look really different, but they all offer the same basic features. Notice here on the right-hand side is where mine plugs in. This is the power cord. It has 2 cables coming off of it. One goes to the wall, and one goes to the pedal that I'll control the speed of the machine with. On the right-hand side here is also the power switch. Also notice I have 2 wheels on the side of my machine. This top wheel, if you'll look at the needle, controls the rotation of the machine. I can do this by hand, 1 stitch at a time. This bottom wheel on my machine controls specialty stitch features. Your machine may not have 2 wheels here, and that's okay. You don't necessarily need a special stitch for this project. Moving around to the front of the machine, you'll see here I can control the width of my stitch by turning this knob. Maybe. Go. Here I can control the length of my stitch. And here is my reverse feature. On my machine, all I have to do is press this button and hold it, and I'm in reverse. And then I let go, and I'll move forward again. On some machines, it might not be a little button. It might be a knob that you have to twist, or a knob that you hold up in place, and then it springs back when you're ready to go forward again. You may also not have controls that look like this, but you should have a way to control the width and the length of your stitch. A moment ago, I talked about this bottom wheel. I will show you these features just for your information, but we'll not really be using these for this project. Here, it shows me which stitch I'm on. Currently, I'm on a zigzag stitch, or number 5, which is found here. I can cycle through and use the different stitches for a project. For this one, I'll be using stitch number 7, which is a centered straight stitch. Okay, let's talk about the area where the magic happens. This is the needle and the presser foot. Now, you might have a difficult time seeing the needle in this video because of all of the other metal behind it. So I'm going to just insert this little card here to show you the needle. You'll notice the needle has a hole in it. When you thread this, your thread goes from front to back in this machine. Now, sometimes a needle is positioned left to right. The hole is this way instead of this way. In that case, more often than not, your thread will go left to right. Remember earlier when I mentioned the wheel on the right-hand side of your machine? That wheel controls the mechanism in the machine, and if you turn that wheel, you can move the needle in and out of the machine as if it were stitching. Now, it's best to get into a habit of only turning this wheel toward you, and that's important when the machine is fully threaded. Also, this piece is the presser foot. There are different types of feet available with most machines. This one is a straight stitch foot, and that's what we'll be using for this project. When you sew, you have to lay the presser foot down onto your fabric. So let's pretend this is fabric. I'm ready to sew. There is a lever either on the side or in the back where you can lay the foot down. And what that does is it puts pressure on your fabric and it helps it move through the machine. These little jagged edge pieces here are called feed dogs. I'm going to turn the wheel again, and the needle is going to move, but also the feed dogs move. They are what pull the fabric through the machine. You do not need to pull the fabric. Let the machine do the work for you. Okay, if we get a little closer, I can show you where the bobbin fits into my machine. I have this black notch here. If I pull on it, it releases the clear plastic cover, exposing the bobbin casing. My bobbin is a drop-in bobbin, which means I literally drop it into the casing and I wind my thread around a couple of hooks. This process will vary greatly depending on your machine, and I advise that you consult your owner's manual about the proper installation of your bobbin. Okay, let's thread our machine. Now what you'll find is that all machines are just slightly different, and while they all follow the same basic path, they might each have their own little quirks. So, like the bobbin, I advise you check out your owner's manual just to see what quirks your machine might have. And maybe it's pretty basic, and it's just like mine. But sometimes it's hard to know because there's so many versions of machines out there. And once you have your machine threaded, we can get our bobbin threaded. And then comes the fun part. Hold onto your top thread, turn the wheel that controls the mechanism of the needle one full rotation toward you. What that's going to do is send the top thread down below, and it grabs the bobbin thread and pulls the bobbin thread up through a slot in the faceplate. Now you'll have two threads. If you need more help with that, check out your owner's manual. It should be much clearer for your particular sewing machine. And then I'll just put my faceplate back in place, and I'm officially ready to sew. All right, we're ready to sew. I have a little scrap of white fabric here. I'm using black thread, and I'm doing that so that you'll be able to see my stitch a little bit clearer. A lot of people like to match their thread to their fabric, and you can pick whatever color thread you like. Notice, out to the sides from my presser foot, I have lines on my machine. Your machine might not have this, but it's really handy to have because these fractions indicate how far away that line is from the needle when the needle is in its center position. On our mask project, we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. A seam allowance is the distance from the edge of the fabric to where you want your stitch to be. On our project, we want that distance to be 1/2 inch, about in there. So what we'll do is use the 4/8 line as a guide. You line the edge of your fabric up with the 4/8 mark, lower your presser foot, and now you're ready to go. You're ready to press the pedal. Let's go. Let the machine take your fabric. You don't need to pull it. All you need to do is guide it and keep it in line with that 4/8 inch mark. Make sure the needle is out of your fabric when you're done. Lift up your presser foot, pull it away from the machine, trim your threads very close to your fabric, and you now have a straight stitch. Now let's do a curve. A lot of people get a little scared
of curves, but don't be. You've got this. You've got this. We're gonna win. But you do the same thing. You've cut your curve. You line it up with the 4/8 inch line. Lay your presser foot down. You're ready to go. The trick is that you have to turn your fabric as you're sewing to keep this curve on that 4/8 inch mark. Here we go. Just turn your fabric as you're going. Like that. I got a little off there at the end. No big deal. Now you follow the curve. Something else important to mention is what we call the back stitch. When you're sewing your stitch, straight or curved, it does not matter, you'll want to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. All that means is that when you begin sewing, you're going to sew a couple of stitches, 2 or 3, put the machine in reverse, and you're going to back up and reverse over those 2 or 3 stitches. And then you'll continue going forward and finish your stitch. When you get to the end, stop, put your machine in reverse 2 or 3 stitches, and then go forward to the end again, and you're done. Make sure your needle is out of the fabric, lift up your presser foot, pull the fabric out, trim your threads, and what this does with the back stitch, it creates a lock to keep your straight stitch in place. I've drawn a pencil line on my scrap piece of fabric to give us a guide for our hand sewing stitch. Now notice I am left-handed, and so I'll be controlling the needle with my left hand. If you are right-handed, you're going to do the same things I do, but basically in reverse. So instead of coming from this direction, you'll probably want to come from this direction. Whichever way is more comfortable for you, either direction is fine. The first thing we're going to do, at the end of our line, pierce the fabric, come out of the fabric about a 1/4 inch away, and pull your thread through. This will bring the knot at the end of your thread to the base of your fabric, and the knot is going to keep your thread from coming out of the fabric. And what I'm going to show you is a running back stitch, not a regular running stitch. This will be a little stronger for your mask. So where you came out of the fabric, go backwards, half the distance from where you pierced the fabric. Split the difference, go into your fabric there. Now you're going to jump a little farther ahead and come out about a 1/2 inch away from where you just pierced, and pull that through. And you're going to repeat this process over and over. I came out of the fabric here, go back about half the distance, go into the fabric, come out about a 1/2 inch down the road, pull it through. Your thread is looping over itself as you go along. That is a running back stitch. It's quite strong for a hand sewing stitch. You will continue this all the way to the end of your stitch. If the distances between your stitches isn't perfect, it's okay. See, my stitches are turning out a little crooked and a little ill-spaced, and I'm fine with that. So, once you get to the end of your stitch, this is an important part. You know, you have a knot at the beginning. Well, you need a knot at the end, kind of like the back stitching process on the sewing machine. So what you can do, when you're at the end of your stitch, I've come out of the fabric here, right beside that, you can pierce the fabric and come right back out almost in the same spot. Pull your needle out, but don't pull it too tight yet. because you're going to use this loop that you've created in the thread right here. Take this loop, take your needle, go through the loop, grab the end of the needle. You can let go of that loop now. Grab your needle. You've created another loop over here. Pull that a little tight, but not too tight just yet. Now go through this loop. And now pull the whole thing tight. I've just made a knot at the end of my stitch. And you can cut your thread. And there is your hand sewing stitch. Crooked and all, like mine. One last thing to talk about in our video today is pressing your seams. I've already stitched a straight seam right here, and in this instance, I've used 2 pieces of fabric, like we will when we're making our mask. What you'll want to do for every seam is to press your seam open, and what that means is that you lay your fabric out, you take the 2 halves of your seam allowance, spread them apart like this, and with your iron, press them open. What this will lead to is a nice flat stitch on the other side. It'll help your mask look clean and crisp.